Hello there, this is Mason with another BMBR review, and we're going over the American Empire. This is written by Joshua B. Freeman. So the first note that we have here is this is really based around the beginning, around like the 1930s. So around the time of like right when the Depression was a pretty big thing. People were just kind of like jobless. The Dust Bowl from this book actually just happened right after the Great Depression. So that was in the 1930s to 1940s. So a lot of pain happened. But luckily there was a bit of a help from the government to the people. So from this book, what I got from it is that before the 1930s, this is coming from a quote, oftentimes the only communication between U.S. citizens and the government was at the post office. So really what that means is that they said here the United States was starting to step it up, fighting against crime, a bit more public schools, infrastructure, things like that. So that's really a twofold. The first fold is that before then, there was not a lot of help against crime, according to what this quote made it sound like, and that people really had a lot of free reign against everything that they were doing. And this especially shows in other parts of the book with business that will be shown later and other things. So the upsurge, or the good part about that is that finally police are starting to help out with crime, starting to be a lot more good involvement with the United States government and its citizens. And it seemed like it was a better place to live in the United States after the 1930s, especially with crime. It would be nice to get some stats on the crime rates to see if they really dropped, but it didn't mention anything specific in the book, which is kind of surprising because you'd think that it'd be neat to have that sort of stat after talking about a massive crime rate change or a massive crime rate policy change. So the next part here, this first chapter is really crammed. And after reading the first chapter and going into the second chapter, it seems that the first chapter really laid the groundworks for a lot of what happens after. A lot of the things that happen in the second chapter and even in the conclusion in the last chapter, they all seem to be based around and supported by or going off of what happened in the first chapter. So, yeah. One of the big ones is labor. So there was a big labor war between the United States and the business owners. The government actually set up a maximum price for a lot of products. That way, prices would be better controlled, and also employees started to ask for better wages because really before this time, it was hard for people to have a stable job. And this largely still tied into what we were first talking about, which is for the people, and that businesses thought that they should get free reign over how they own and control their business. So if they choose to fire someone, or they choose to do something else, or they choose to control their own price, that should be up to them. And that was their business motive. And really it sounds and it makes a lot of sense for where they're coming from right there. Going into the repercussions of that is that a lot of the people didn't feel like they were able to have a good life. A lot of people back in the day didn't even have running water in their houses. There's some more stats, but I think it was anywhere between 70-ish years ago that a lot of homes didn't even have running water, and it was a common thing that could be put in. So the basic values and the minimum way of life is something really new within the previous 100 years. And it wasn't something that was very enforced even 100 years ago. So a couple of the big things are quality of life. People are making sure to speak their voice and just getting right down to it. I might have some sort of sickness here. So that seemed to be one of the big spots. Also, just massive work growth all around the United States is a big one. Massive work growth all around the United States seemed to be one of the things that helped out with American growth. A lot of the war industries and the war facilities were handed over to private businesses to help with industrial growth. So all of those things really just added up to a bigger growth overall of private businesses, economic boom. There's a lot of little details in here that all interweave together to make something that turned out to be absolutely phenomenal. Really, just the United States, they went really hard on their war effort, and they used a lot of those industries, as I've said earlier, to turn into private businesses. So in a way, the war sparked a chance for the United States to allow more businesses to have a chance and to grow and start. There's a stat here that a lot of the goods and manufactured goods, it was somewhere around 25% of manufactured goods came from the United States, with only 5% of the people. So that's a lot. That's a pretty impressive stat. So really, I've had a couple people teach me that it's best to read the beginning, the end, and then a couple chapters in the middle. So I obviously went to the end. I'll end up reading a couple of chapters in the middle, but a lot of neat things end up coming together towards the end. So really it talks about a resurgence in gangs and just all of these consumeristic things are really very new. Like around, I want to say they said somewhere around 1984 that it started to pick up this large consumeristic approach. Even a little bit before then. I'm not too sure on my dates. These are just fairly rough. But so per person, the amount of square feet that people got to live in, when I think it was tripled within 30 or 40 years. So to put that in perspective, by the time America had 750 square feet per person, the closest one was Britain, which had like 370, and then Japan that had 170. So living in homes, the home square foot increased. This isn't to say that per person, a person only had 170 square feet. This is talking about the houses that were built. So all in all, consumeristic approach started to go up. Really it just seemed that people just started to buy things because they could. And it talks about towards the end that there just started to be a rather unhealthy way of people living just because they had so much opportunity. McMansions were actually the first name for a mansion, and it just started out where people had this luxury and they decided to use it and just build these massive mansions for their own well-being. I talked a little bit about global warming and emissions and how people were denying that. Now everyone's starting to get on track about it because they don't think that the way that we're living now is maintainable. So really, it was just neat to read about the time period that is going on right now and how a historian put it in their own words and how it just so accurately put together. So to put this in better words, the historian when they wrote this, they just put everything how it is, seemingly with they try and wrap up like their own means. Really, people seem to revolve around. It's really a mixture of for the people doing what they want versus having a stable economy and a minimum standard of living. And really, in the modern times, it's just another iteration of that. And nowadays, it was people have so much luxury that they're building these massive things. There's so much, there's way more greenhouses being produced now than back then. And now people are starting to have to reform some of these ways to figure out a sustainable approach. Is this historian's look on it? So it's just it's very interesting how it all comes together with that, and that's the next part of this BMBR franchise.